This is private property. The HOA president's voice sliced through the calm, her finger jabbing at my little fishing boat like it was a pirate ship invading her kingdom. I was drifting peacefully in the center of my lake, on my ranch, my jaw practically on the deck from the sheer audacity. Moments later, a cop car roared up the dusty road, lights flashing like a disco, no siren, just pure drama. I stood there, mid-cast, fishing rod in one hand, root beer in the other, wondering how my quiet afternoon had turned into this circus. The officer stepped out, hand resting on his belt like I was some mastermind criminal instead of a guy floating on his own lake. "Sir," he said, voice flat, "we got a call from Lake Hill Estates HOA. They say you're trespassing." I blinked, almost laughing. "Officer, I own this lake, that house up on the ridge. Mine too." He squinted, skeptical. "You got proof of that?" "Deeds in my truck," I replied, keeping my cool. "Well, come ashore," he said with a sigh, like he was the one being put out. As I reeled in my line, the HOA president, still fuming from the bank, hollered, "We warned you, Rick. You don't get to use our lake like you're above the rules." 8 minutes later, I made a call not to a lawyer, not to the cops, but to a broker. In one swift move, I bought the entire marina, the one the HOA relied on for their fancy boats, their community picnics, their precious summer concerts. Every last floating dock was mine now, and they had no clue. I gazed at them from my boat, their arms crossed like petulant kids on the shore, and I couldn't help but smile. "Let's see how they like my rules," I muttered under my breath. But before I could say another word, the HOA president's voice rang out again. "Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you've had any run-ins with an HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel." Stormed toward my boathouse with a crowbar. What she did next nearly burned everything down. "Hi everyone, where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments. I'd love to know where my ranch friends are." Let me tell you how this crazy war with the HOA all started. Not with shouting, not with lawyers, not even with the cops. It started with kindness. My name's Rick Dawson. I'm 52, a retired oil engineer, and I live on a 48-acre ranch just outside a little town called Winslow Bend, Arizona. I bought the ranch 2 years ago when I finally said goodbye to the city chaos. I just wanted peace. A couple of cows, some goats, my dog, Tex, and my late brother's fishing boat. My ranch has a natural spring-fed lake. It's small but clean, surrounded by willow trees and rocky ledges. When I bought the land, the lake came with it, all documented, all legal. But what I didn't know back then was that the nearby neighborhood, Lake Hill Estates, had been using the lake for years before I bought it. Unbeknownst to me, their little HOA had been unofficially treating the lake like a community pool. They even built a floating dock on the east bank on my side without ever owning the land. Now, here's where things get tricky. They used to have some handshake agreement with the old owner, Mr. Cole. Sweet guy. But he was in his 80s and didn't care who swam in the water. But he passed away and I bought the land from his daughter at full price. I tried to keep things friendly at first. 3 days after I moved in, I baked cookies. Yes, I bake. And I walked into the HOA office just to say hello and introduce myself. That's when I met her. Margaret Pierce, HOA president. Tall, sharp bob haircut, wore pearl earrings like she was hosting the Oscars, and the attitude like she personally built the neighborhood with her bare hands. She barely looked at my cookies. "I hope you're planning to maintain the shoreline," she said. "It's been a mess since Mr. Cole stopped caring." "I'll do my best," I said kindly. "It's a ranch lake, so I might use it for fishing. Maybe even teach some kids down the road how to cast fishing." She interrupted, horrified. "There's no fishing allowed on HOA property." I tilted my head. "Ma'am, it's not HOA property. That lake is on my ranch. I just wanted to be neighborly." Her smile froze. "Well, We'll see about that. I should have walked away then, but I didn't. Over the next few weeks, little things started happening. My sign saying private property disappeared. A group of teenagers jumped off my dock and ran when I approached. A man from the HOA showed up with a permit to prune a tree on my land. I stayed calm. I mailed a letter to the HOA with copies of my deed and surveyor map. No reply. Then one Saturday morning, I saw a full-on barbecue happening on my lakefront. Folding chairs, loud music, people in swimsuits. Someone had even pulled a floating cooler into the water. That was my breaking point. I politely asked them to leave. Margaret showed up 20 minutes later, arms crossed. This lake has always belonged to the community, she said. You're ruining a decades-old tradition. And I bought it fair and square. I replied, look, I'm not trying to be mean, but I can't be liable if someone drowns here. You guys didn't even ask permission. Her eyes narrowed. The next morning, I woke up to find my boathouse vandalized, fishing poles broken, my brother's old tackle box smashed, the words HOA property spray painted across the side. I filed a police report, but there were no witnesses, no cameras, so I installed some. 2 weeks later, I took my first real boat ride. Just me, Tex the dog, and the sunrise. I floated right across the middle of the lake, my fishing rod in hand, camera strapped to my chest in case anything happened. I didn't have to wait long. Margaret was at the edge of the water within minutes, her face red, waving her phone. And that's when she called the cops. That call sparked what would become the most expensive mistake of her life. But it wasn't over yet. 8 minutes later, the officer showed up. He questioned me. I kept my cool and I made my quiet call to my friend Greg, a real estate broker in town. I asked one thing. Find out who owns the marina and the land it sits on. The answer, a company that had been looking to sell for months. They were tired of dealing with the HOA's constant demands and rule changes. They wanted out. The HOA had been renting that marina land and their lease was up for renewal. I made an offer that same day, cash fast track. I owned it by sundown. I didn't say a word to anyone. I waited, but Margaret couldn't. The next morning, she came back, not with another phone call, but with a crowbar in hand, storming toward my boathouse. And what she did next made me run full speed down the dock because Tex was inside, and she wasn't stopping. I dropped my fishing rod and sprinted from the edge of the dock, my boots pounding against the wooden boards. Tex, I shouted. The old boathouse door creaked as Margaret jammed the crowbar between the frame and the latch. Tex barked from inside. Sharp, panic yelps, the kind he only let out when something was really wrong. Get away from there, I yelled, but Margaret didn't stop. With one hard yank, the door cracked open. She stepped inside with her back to me just as I reached the threshold, her crowbar raised. Tex. I dove forward, shoving the door wide. Tex darted between her legs, whimpering as he jumped into my arms. What the heck are you doing? I shouted, my voice echoing off the metal walls. She spun around, breathing hard, her hair wild now. Not the perfect bob I remembered. This is our boathouse, she screamed. You can't block access to Lake Hill. Amenities, I stared at her in disbelief. There are security cameras in here. Margaret, you just broke into my property. You think you can buy a lake and bully us all out? She snapped. We've had this for generations. I took a slow breath, Tex trembling in my arms. You're trespassing. You vandalized my dock. You broke into my boathouse. And you're threatening my dog. I should call the cops. You should call the cops, she said with a cruel smile. Let's see if they care about one cranky old rancher or an HOA with legal representation. That was it. I didn't say another word. I just turned, locked Tex back in the house, and drove straight into town. Now, I wasn't just mad. I was ready, but I wasn't going to fight fire with fire. I was going to fight it with paperwork, with land, with power, or they didn't even know I had. You see, when I bought the marina the night before, I didn't just get some wooden planks in a shed. I got control over the only public access the HOA had to the lake. Without that marina, their boats had nowhere to launch. Their vents had nowhere to set up, and the lease they had before it expired 2 weeks ago. They hadn't paid a cent since. Greg handed me the contract at the county records office that day. All signed and sealed. Rick, he said, the entire shoreline, 40 yards from the waterline, is yours now. That includes the walkway, the gravel road, even the picnic tables. What about their 4th of July party? I asked. Greg chuckled. They're going to need your permission for that now. I smiled, but I still didn't say anything to them. Not yet. Instead, I hired a crew and installed a new metal gate across the old marina entrance. I added private security signs. I even painted the entire floating dock bright red with the words private property in 3-foot letters. It took less than 2 hours before the HOA board members started showing up. First was Carl, their treasurer, then Sandy, the secretary, then Margaret, pacing like a tiger behind the gate. She rattled it hard, shouting, "You can't do this." I stayed quiet behind my sunglasses, sipping a lemonade and watching from a bench like I was just enjoying the weather. She pointed at me. "You're going to regret this, Rick Dawson." "No, Margaret," I said. "You are." That night, I sent them a formal cease and desist letter through my attorney outlining all the property violations, the trespassing incidents, and the damages. We attached the security footage, every minute of her break-in. It was enough for a restraining order, but I still held off because I had a better plan. The very next week, Lake Hill Estate sent out their HOA newsletter, all cheery and fake. "Join us for our annual lakefront BBQ this Saturday. Same time, same place." That same place was now mine. I waited. Saturday arrived. People in polos and cargo shorts started pouring in with fold-out chairs and coolers, music thumping, kids running down the gravel path. And then they hit the gate, the new red one. And standing in front of it, a private security guard I'd hired. Big guy, polite, firm. "Sorry folks," he said. "This is private property now. You'll need written permission to enter." Margaret nearly combusted on the spot. "This is our land," she roared. "You can't block an HOA-sanctioned event." But she had no paperwork and I had all of it. I watched from across the lake sitting in my boat again. Tex curled beside me. This time I had speakers mounted to the dock. I clicked the remote and my voice rang out loud and clear. "Good afternoon, Lakeville. This marina is now under new ownership. Please refer to county records if you have any questions. You may also contact your HOA board for a refund of nothing." Gasps and stunned silence followed, then murmurs, then shouting. One family turned and walked away. Then another and another. That night, my inbox was full. Emails from residents asking if they could speak privately, offering to pay for lake access, apologizing for how Margaret had acted. One said, "She never told us the lake was privately owned. We're so sorry. My kids loved swimming there." Another, "We thought you were the bad guy. Turns out she just didn't want to lose her power." I didn't reply yet, because I wanted to do one thing first. The next morning, I drove into town again, this time to the city council office. Turns out HOA charters are a fragile thing when you build your community on land you don't actually own, and the charter for Lake Hill's lake access privileges. It was conditional, bound entirely to their use of the marina, which they no longer had. So, I filed a petition to revoke their charter permanently. And while that process began quietly behind the scenes, Margaret had her own surprise in store. Because the next day, I woke up to a pile of dead fish dumped on my lawn with the note stapled to the boathouse door. "This ain't over, Ranch Boy." And I knew exactly who sent it. But I also knew something she didn't. The security camera now had night vision. At exactly 2:43 a.m., the camera caught her. Headlamp on, hoodie pulled tight, dragging to black trash bags filled with rotting fish from the back of her Lexus SUV. Yes, a Lexus. Like some cartoon villain sneaking around under the moonlight. She wasn't even careful. She looked straight into the lens twice. I didn't need to enhance the image or zoom in. It was Margaret, the HOA president, caught red-handed in high definition, dumping decaying fish across my front lawn like she was performing some swampy exorcism. And just before she drove off, she stuck a metal stake in the ground. Attached to it was a red sign that read, "How strong, we're not backing down." I stood on my porch the next morning, arms folded, text at my side, staring at the mess. The stench was unbearable, but you know what I felt. Not anger, not even surprise, just pity, because this was a woman whose entire identity had been built on control. She controlled neighborhood fences. She controlled trash placement. She controlled the height of flower beds and how long you could park your car in your own driveway. And now I'd remove the crown from her head. And she was unraveling fast. I didn't call the cops that morning. Instead, I called Officer Rodas, the same officer who showed up the day she called 911 on me. We sat at my kitchen table with the footage on a laptop. He rubbed his temple inside. "You sure you want to press charges?" "Not yet," I said. "I want to give her one last chance, one public chance." He raised an eyebrow. "What are you planning?" I smiled. "A lakefront town meeting." By Saturday, I'd printed and mailed 127 flyers to every homeowner in Lake Hill Estates. I paid a local boy to slip them into mailboxes and under doors. The flyer read, "Town meeting at the lake. Learn the truth. Ask questions." Hosted by ranch owner Rick Dawson. Free BBQ and drinks this Saturday. Our 3 p.m. HOA board. Welcome to attend. And just like that, the bait was set. By 2:45 p.m., over 60 residents had shown up, picnic blankets laid out, paper plates in hand, kids eating hot dogs. I had a rented speaker system, cold lemonade, and even a small stage made of hay bales. At 3 p.m. sharp, I walked up with a microphone and said, "Folks, I appreciate you all coming. My name's Rick Dawson. I own this ranch, and yes, that includes the lake you've all enjoyed for many years." Gasps, whispers. One man raised his hand. "Wait, you own the lake?" I nodded. "I bought this ranch 2 years ago. The lake is private property. I've tried being neighborly, but some people, I didn't name her, haven't respected the boundary. So, today, I want to set the record straight and answer any questions you have." I spent the next 10 minutes calmly explaining the land ownership. I showed copies of the deed, photos of the old property lines, even a map from the county assessor's website. I played audio of Margaret telling me I couldn't fish. I showed the video of her calling the cops. And then finally, I played the security footage from 2:43 a.m. The room fell silent. Her face was unmistakable. The trash bags, the fish, the sign, the note, everything. Margaret was sitting near the back, arms crossed, her face pale as flour. Then a woman stood up, a neighbor I'd never met. "Margaret," she said, voice trembling. "You told us this man was lying, that he forged those documents. You told us he was trying to take the lake from us." Another voice. "You said the Marina belonged to Lake Hill." Someone else shouted. "You made us vote to spend HOA funds on a lawsuit." Margaret stood up. "He tricked us all. He's lying. That footage could be fake." I stepped forward. "Ma'am, the police already have the original footage. You can deny it here or in court." Her mouth opened, then closed. She turned and stormed off, pushing through the crowd. No one followed her. The next morning, I found a letter taped to my front gate. Handwritten, sloppy, "Rick, I'm sorry I let this get out of hand. I just didn't want to lose what little power I had. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do hope this ends here. Margaret." And for a second, I considered letting it go, but I remembered something. That dog, that tackle box, that spray paint, those fish. She hadn't stopped because she learned a lesson. She stopped because she got caught. So, I made one more call to my lawyer. He filed a formal complaint with the city council, citing vandalism, harassment, and fraudulent HOA practices under Margaret's leadership. I attached the footage, emails from neighbors, and the petition to revoke the HOA's Marina privileges. 3 days later, the city sent Lake Hill a letter effective immediately. The HOA's charter access to the marina and the lake was suspended pending further investigation. That meant no more HOA lake events, no more HOA fundraisers, and no more HOA anything unless they got my written consent. But I still wasn't done, because while Margaret licked her wounds, the rest of the HOA board began to panic. They just lost their queen, and now they were trying to crawl their way back to power. That's when Carl, the HOA treasurer, made his move, and he made it with fire, because 2 days later, the dock burst into flames. The smell of burning would hit me before I saw the flames. It was early, barely 6:15 a.m., when Tech started barking like a siren beside my bed. I scrambled up, still half asleep, and glanced out the window toward the lake. Smoke, thick, black, ugly smoke curling up over the trees like a signal flare. I threw on my boots, no shirt, no hat, just panic, and bolted out the front door, the red-painted dock, the one I had spent days restoring and marking as private. It was on fire. Not just a little fire. I'm talking full-on blaze. Flames dancing off the surface of the lake, eating away the boards, cracking under the heat. The security sign had melted, twisted like a ghost in the wind. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from my truck and sprinted down the slope. By the time I reached the shoreline, half the dock was gone. The floating barrels had already popped from the heat. Some debris drifted toward the far bank. I sprayed what I could, but it was too late. The damage was done. The fire department came an hour later. They said the fire started intentionally. No lightning, no electrical issue. It was arson. And just like that, the lake became a crime scene. That evening, Officer Rodas came by again. We found gasoline residue on the wood, he told me, tapping his notepad. Somebody poured accelerant across the dock planks and lit it up from the far end. I nodded. Any fingerprints? He glanced up. We did get a partial from a piece of broken glass. You got cameras on that part of the lake. I shook my head. Not that angle, he sighed. I'll keep you posted. But Rick, you should know something. Someone from the HOA made a complaint this morning. They say you burned it yourself for attention. I froze. Who? He looked at me carefully. Carl Masters, the treasurer. I nearly laughed. Of course. Carl had always been the quiet one in the HOA. Bald, late 40s, always wore sweater vests, even when it was 90 out. Margaret's little shadow. But ever since the town meeting exposed her, he'd been whispering around the neighborhood, trying to save what little clout the HOA still had, and now he was blaming me for the fire. Do I look like someone who torched his own dock? I asked, gesturing toward the blackened remains. That was my brother's fishing platform. He built it before he passed. I just finished repainting it 2 weeks ago. Rhodes gave a slow nod. I believe you, but Carl's pushing hard. That night, I watched the footage from my other cameras again, just in case. And sure enough, at 3:12 a.m., a figure in a hoodie walked along the west trail with a small red gas can. I paused the frame. Not Margaret, not a kid. It was Carl. His glasses glinted for a split second in the moonlight. Gotcha. I downloaded the footage and made 2 copies. One for the police, one for myself. Then I made a call. Not to Carl, not to the cops, but to every single Lake Hill resident who had emailed me after the BBQ. I invited them all to a second gathering. Same lake, same spot. But this time, no flyers, just word of mouth. I called it the real HOA meeting. The next day, the lakefront was packed again. This time, I didn't set up a stage or a barbecue. I stood by the scorched dock, ashes still curling, in the breeze with a screen and a projector hooked to my laptop. "Thanks for coming," I said simply. You all saw what happened, a murmur of agreement. Someone tried to destroy what I've built, what you all used to enjoy. This lake, this place. I clicked the mouse. The footage played, the gas can, the figure, the spark of flame at the far corner. Then the glint of glasses and a loud gasp from the crowd. "Carl," someone whispered. Two women turned toward the back. Carl was standing behind the crowd, pale, sweating. His mouth hung open. "That's not," he stammered. "That's not real. He faked that." I stepped forward. "This footage was sent directly to the Winslow County Sheriff's Office this morning," I said. "They confirmed the timestamp, the location, and, reviewing the partial fingerprint from the glass, your identity?" Gasps again. One man from the back, Mr. Howard, the elderly guy with the walking cane, shouted, "You're a disgrace." "Carl," another woman pointed, "you could have killed someone." Carl turned and ran. Literally ran through the trees like a cartoon villain who got caught monologuing too early. Later that evening, he was arrested. Arson, destruction of private property, false police report. It was on the local news by dinner time. HOA board member caught in dock fire scandal. I didn't celebrate. I just sat on my porch sipping sweet tea, watching the sun go down over the lake. Tex rested his head on my boot, and for the first time in weeks there was silence, but not peace, because Margaret still hadn't spoken since that letter, and rumor had it she was preparing something bigger. I found out what it was the next morning, because taped to my new Marina gate was a legal document stamped signed and threatening to do what no one had tried before. The HOA was suing me for eminent domain. They were trying to claim my lake. I stood at the gate with the letter in my hand, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Petition for community use and reacquisition of shared environmental assets under emergency. HOA domain clause. That was the bold print on the front page. It was 5 full pages of legal fluff, but the message was clear. Margaret and the Lakehill HOA were trying to steal my lake. They were claiming that, because the lake had been used by the community for over 20 years, it now qualified as a shared amenity. And their lawyer, some high-priced city guy with a last name that sounded like a furniture store, had filed it with the local zoning commission. They wanted to take it from me legally by force. I read it again, then again. It didn't make sense. Eminent domain. That's government language, not HOA business. But the way they spun it, they made it sound like I was blocking public recreation. They even claimed I was neglecting environmental upkeep, which was hilarious considering they dumped dead fish on my lawn and set my dock on fire. I looked over the gate at my quiet lake, the burned dock, the willow trees, Tex sniffing the gravel beside me, tail drooping like he could feel the tension in my chest. I took the papers inside and called Greg, my real estate broker friend. He answered on the first ring. "Please tell me you're seeing this," I said. "I saw it," he replied, "and it's nonsense. But it's also dangerous nonsense." "How?" "Because if the board spins this right and they convince a few council members, they could trigger a review. And once that happens, the city gets involved. And once the city gets involved, it becomes a circus." I finished. Greg sighed. "Exactly? Okay," I said. "Then it's time I take the gloves off." 3 days later, I filed a counter lawsuit, not just for harassment, not just for property damage, but for fraud. I compiled every lie, every email, every video recording. From Margaret's early threats to Carl's arson, I gathered witness statements from residents who admitted Margaret manipulated them into voting on illegal HOA expenditures. And then I submitted a motion to dissolve the HOA's ability to govern lake-related matters permanently. The media caught wind of it almost immediately. Lake War, retired rancher versus HOA powerhouse. Lakehill scandal, president faces lawsuit after fraud allegations. One man, one lake, one epic fight against HOA tyranny. I laughed when I saw that last one. Dramatic, but not wrong. Local news trucks started driving through the ranch roads. A reporter even stopped by my gate one afternoon asking if I'd make a statement. I did. Sure, I said. Here's my statement. It's my lake. I bought it legally and I have the documents. The HOA didn't. They never did. They just wanted control. Now, they've lost it and they're throwing tantrums. That clip aired on the 6 o'clock news. By the next morning, my inbox had exploded. Not just from locals, from strangers, people from other states writing things like, "You're fighting for all of us who've been bullied by HOAs. Thank you for standing up. I lost my property rights to an HOA. I wish I had your courage." I was stunned. This was bigger than I thought. 2 weeks later, the city council held an emergency hearing. The HOA came in full force. Suits, files, even a banner with their logo. Margaret, of course, led the charge. She looked smug, dressed like she was about to sell someone a yacht. I came in with texts, Greg, my lawyer, and a simple manila folder. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the microphone, unfolded a single sheet of paper, and read, "This lake was purchased for $890,000 with a clean title. No liens, no HOA easements. The previous owner permitted access voluntarily that ended with his passing. The current HOA has no legal standing and has attempted to gain control through intimidation, false claims," and I paused, acts of vandalism now under criminal investigation. I set the security footage on the council's desk. "The only thing I've done is protect what I own." Then I stepped aside. The room was quiet. Margaret tried to argue. She waved papers, yelled about community legacy, and accused me of trying to dismantle the neighborhood spirit. But the council wasn't buying it. Councilman Reeves leaned forward and asked the final question. "Miss Pierce, do you or the HOA have any legal document showing ownership of the lake, dock, or marina?" She stuttered, looked at her lawyer, then shook her head. "No, sir, that was it." The hearing ended, and 3 days later I got a letter in the mail. The zoning board had ruled in my favor. HOA petition denied. HOA lake access revoked. Rick Dawson recognized as sole legal owner of the lake and all adjacent shoreline structures. I stared at the letter for a long time, then I folded it neatly, walked outside and nailed it right above the Marina gate so the whole neighborhood could see. But even as I smiled, I noticed something strange at the edge of the tree line. A silver SUV, the same one Margaret always drove, and beside it, a man in a black suit holding a clipboard, watching me. I squinted. He raised his phone and took a picture. The silver SUV disappeared into the trees just as I stepped off the porch. Tex growled low beside me, hackles raised. He never barked without reason. That black-suited man standing beside Margaret's vehicle hadn't said a word. Hadn't even flinched, just snapped that one picture of me by the gate and vanished like smoke. I stood at the edge of the gravel path for a full minute, heart pounding. Who the heck was he? Not one of the HOA board members, not a cop, and definitely not a neighbor. Then I saw it lying in the gravel where his shoe must have slipped. A business card, white, embossed, clean. It read Everland Property Development Group. We build tomorrow's communities. Robert V. King, Regional Director. I stared at the name, then back at the path. Everland, that was no HOA lawyer. That was a land developer. I took the card inside and called Greg immediately. He answered on the second ring. "Rick, ever heard of Everland Property Development?" There was a pause then. "Yeah, big fish. They buy up ranch land, turn it into high-end lake communities, gates, golf carts, yoga lawnings." Margaret was parked right next to one of their guys. Greg went quiet, then he said something I hadn't considered. "She's trying to sell the neighborhood." The next morning, confirmed it. An anonymous tip landed in my inbox from someone claiming to be a former HOA board member. Attached was a PDF titled Lake Hill Estates Redevelopment Proposal. And sure enough, right there on page 2 was a map. It had my lake in the center, my ranch land highlighted in red, and around it, over 200 new homes, a floating restaurant, a community wellness center, and a giant marina on my shoreline. They even had a line item labeled negotiation with current ranch owner pending legal leverage, so that was her game. Margaret wasn't just trying to win. She was trying to sell me off. They thought if the lawsuit worked, I'd be forced into a corner, forced to sell or be surrounded. They'd overtake the lake one way or another. Well, too bad for them. I don't do cornered. That same day, I called a press conference at the lake. I'd never done anything like it before. Just me, techs, a few folding chairs, and a portable mic setup. But word spread fast. Neighbors showed up. Reporters came. Even the town mayor rolled in late with a folding stool and a soda. When everyone was seated, I stood by the gate, held up the business card, and said, Everland Property Group wants to turn this land into a resort community. They want to buy this ranch, the lake, your trees, your peace, and they're doing it behind your backs. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Margaret Pierce and the HOA board, what's left of it, have been in private meetings with developers for months. They tried to use me as the final piece of the puzzle, suing me, harassing me, blaming me for everything so they could push me out and sell your neighborhood. I paused, holding up the leaked PDF. This proposal shows a full-scale tear down. Your houses will be reassessed, your HOA fees will triple, your privacy will vanish, and your legacy bulldozed. Now the murmurs turned into shouting. People stood pointed. I didn't vote for this. They said we were expanding the park. They're selling us out. I raised my voice over the crowd. Well, I've got news for you. I'm not selling. Not a foot. Not a pebble. This ranch isn't going anywhere. And now that the HOA has lost their lake privileges, they don't have the leverage they promised Everland. Reporters asked questions. Neighbors started filming. But the biggest reaction came from the mayor, who stepped forward and took the mic from me gently. I've seen enough, she said. If this is true, if this document is legitimate, we'll launch a formal investigation into the HOA and their dealings with Everland. And just like that, Margaret's final card started to crumble. That night, I heard tires screech outside. Then a rock hit my front door. When I opened it, no one was there. But on the ground, a manila envelope. Inside were printed photos of me, of texts, of my house, my truck, even my sister's cabin 2 miles away on the ridge. On the back of one photo was a handwritten note. You're playing a big man's game now, ranch boy. Careful what you protect, because some things break easy. That's when I knew this wasn't just Margaret anymore. This was Evelyn. They weren't just losing money now. They were losing millions, and desperate people make stupid decisions. So, I did the only smart thing left to do. I picked up the phone and I called the feds, because buried in the redevelopment proposal way down on page 9 was something most people missed. Everland had already secured a government grant. And if they falsified information to get it, that was federal fraud. I reported everything, the photos, the document, the threat, the zoning plans, and the anonymous tip that suggested Everland was bribing local officials for expedited approvals. The agent on the line took it seriously, very seriously, and said they'd be in touch. But, while the investigation began quietly, the retaliation came loud because the next morning, I walked out of my house and found text missing. Text, I shouted, voice cracking as it echoed across the quiet morning lake. No jingle of his collar, no paw prints by the door, no sign of him on the porch where he always slept. My stomach dropped. I searched everywhere. His bed, the barn, the ATV shed, even under the dock. Nothing. He was gone. And taped to the boathouse door right where Texas leash used to hang was another note. Stand down. Sell, or your dog won't be the last thing to disappear. My hands shook. This wasn't HOA politics anymore. This was criminal. I raced inside, grabbed my phone, and called Officer Rhodes. They intimidate property owners, force panic, then buy up the land cheap. But this time, they crossed a line. By morning, 3 unmarked black cars rolled into town. Everland's local office was raided, laptops seized, phones confiscated, and Margaret, she was arrested. Apparently, she wasn't just in talks with Everland. She'd received kickbacks, a bribe, a $75,000 consulting fee funneled through a fake landscaping invoice to her HOA account. The town exploded with the news. Neighbors were shocked, some cried, some screamed. But the best part, that same morning, a call came through. A gas station manager to towns over had spotted Tex tied behind a dumpster, hungry but alive. Little boy had recognized him from the TV reports and called it in. I broke every speed limit on the highway getting there. When I arrived and opened my truck door, Tex barked once, wagged his tail, and jumped straight into my arms. I cried like a baby, and I didn't care who saw. The fallout came fast and loud. Everland stock tanked after national news ran the story. Land developer caught in fraud and dog napping scandal. Retired rancher defeats corrupt HOA and billion-dollar firm. America's favorite ranch dog returns home. Yeah, they even made Tex a Twitter account. Back in Winslow Bend, the HOA was officially dissolved by town order. Their funds were frozen, their board removed, and in a twist no one expected, I was offered the opportunity to purchase the entire Lakeville Estates Marina area for pennies on the dollar. I bought it, then bulldozed every fake HOA sign from the shoreline, and in its place, I opened the Winslow Lake Community Dock. Free to the public, no HOA strings, no rules about barbecue smoke or plastic flamingos, just families, fishing, and freedom. On opening day, over 300 residents came down. There was music, food trucks, even a cardboard cutout of Tex and sunglasses. Kids took selfies with him. Old folks thanked me with trembling hands. Someone handed me a homemade pie and whispered, "You saved this place." But you know what? I didn't do it for the praise. I did it because no one should be bullied off their own land. Because one quiet man with a lake and a dog shouldn't have to go to war just to be left alone. Because kindness doesn't mean weakness, and justice sometimes wears boots. So now I sit on my rebuilt dock, Tex beside me, watching the sun slide across the water. The lake is still, the ranch is mine, and the next time someone thinks about calling the cops on me for floating my boat on my own water, they better be ready to swim. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget, always check who really owns the lake.